Hello, everybody. Hello, Dan, and hello, all the spectators. Well, we now move a little bit substantially to the topic of growth models of Keynesian inspiration. The title of our paper is An Even Development in Growth Models of Keynesian Inspiration. The authors is Professor Oreiro, Vítor Dotta, Marvel, and João Pedro Machado. So to begin with, we will argue the differences between the proximate and ultimate causes of economic development. For instance, the proximate causes of economic development are those immediately responsible for the object in question, and while these causes are, and while the ultimate causes are the ones distant in time, and are the base causes of economic development and the origin of the phenomenon. In growth theory, the proximate causes are the ones directly related to the level of income per capita, physical capital, human capital, natural resources, and the efficiency in usage of total assets. For instance, Ross argues that the ultimate causes are geography, institutions, income distribution, and macroeconomic policy regimes. Regarding the proximate causes, there are two distinct large groups. For instance, you have the first theories that are derived from the works of Solow in 1956 and 57, which is referred to in the literature as neoclassical approach, and also where the fundamental limit to economic growth is the supply side constraints. The long-term real growth in these models are determined by the accumulation of factors of production and the rate of technical progress, and then Say's law is valid in the long run. The second group is derived from the theories, from the Keynesian principle of effective demand. It was for Keynes' disciples to extend the principle of effective demand to the long run, specifically Roy Harrod, John Robinson, and Nicholas Calder, which allowed for changes in capital stock, population, and production techniques over time. The models built by these authors also contain a typical Keynesian idea, which is the investment determines savings, and entrepreneurs' decisions to invest is fundamental in explaining the long-run economic growth. These models focus on mature economies, which is developed economies that have already completed their industrialization process, and the existing labor forces are not in the subsistence sector anymore, and was transferred already to the modern or capitalist sectors, and therefore labor supply is not perfectly elastic, and as in the initial stages of industrialization. The result is that real wages are not determined by the reproduction costs of the labor force. Well, regarding technological symmetries in these models, the fundamental characteristic of mature and developed economies is that they operate in the frontier of technology. That is, they use the most advanced production techniques, and also resulting in the highest possible value added per capita. In this sense, the growth of labor productivity necessarily results from advances in the frontier of technology, instead of resulting from importing or imitating already existing technologies abroad. So in these models developed in the 1960s, 50s and 60s, focused on developed economies, and the technological asymmetries were absent, does not fit at explaining an even economic performance existing between developed and developing economies. For instance, this is quite a famous table from Barros Sala Martin from 1995, where they show the differences in average growth of income per capita of our selected countries in the past 100 years, up to until the 1990s. And you can clearly see the enormous difference between the top countries, for instance, Japan, and the countries at the bottom, Argentina and Bangladesh, for instance. So industrialization and technology. The differences in income per capita observed reflect in the first place of the differences existing in the technological frontier. So that is the fact that countries find themselves at the technological frontiers and others are lagging behind. To explain this differences in growth of income per capita, Models derived from Thurl in 1979 and Verspagen in 1993 allowed to incorporate these asymmetries in technology and in a productive structure in the formal presentation of demand-led growth models, explaining the uneven growth between economies with a traditionally Keynesian background. Growth models for developed economies based on Caldor, Pasinetti, and Verspagen. So industrialized economies where, as I mentioned, where all labor has already moved from the subsistence sector, and labor is constrained in the long run by the population growth. Potential rate of growth in this economy is determined by the sum of the growth rate of the population and the rate of growth of labor productivity. A critical characteristic is that technical progress is embodied in the machines and capital equipment, and the growth rate of labor productivity is determined by the rate on which capital stock per worker is growing and is expressed in the technical progress function. Therefore, we can characterize this model as an endogenous growth model, as technological progress is endogenous. So for these models, developed economy is not necessarily at the technological frontier. The technological progress function in these models incorporate a positive and negative effects of the technological gap, which is the relation between the country's position and the frontier of technology. And income distribution between wages and profits are the adjusting mechanism between the natural rate of growth and the growth rate of which is compatible with the macroeconomic equilibrium between savings and investments. That is the warranted growth rates. Well, so to set up the model for production techniques and the natural rate of growth, we start setting up the model with a homogeneous good, fixed coefficients production function, the typical Leontief production function, where capital and labor are efficiently used if it follows the condition set by equation 2. In the continuing setting of the model, considering a developed economy, we're assuming that the rate of employment is equal to the rate of growth of labor supply. In equation 5, we show that the growth rate is equal to the sum of the growth rate of the labor force and the growth rate of labor productivity. In the technical progress function, we have in conventional or neoclassical economic theory, labor productivity can be separated in two. First, by an increase in capital stock per worker, that is in capital intensity, and from advances in the state-of-the-art of technology. For the post-Keynesian and for this type of model that we are observing, it's not possible to distinguish clearly between the technological progress that is disembodied from new machines and capital equipment. Therefore, we express the growth rate of labor productivity as a function of the growth rate of the capital stock per worker in equation 7. Well, this is more of the setting up of the model. I will skip this part. And then we have the technological knowledge at the frontier, which is TN, and technological level TS, where the sigma is the technological learning capacity of the economy, which is called the absorbing capacity. And then the technological progress function can be expressed as equation 11. We can observe that the growth rate of labor productivity depends on the growth rate of the capital stock and on the growth rate of labor productivity and the technological gap. So using equation 11, we do a numerical example, which becomes clear that the rate of growth of labor productivity as a function of the technological gap, as we move from the right side of the equation to the left side, we see that as we reduce the technological gap, there's an increase in the growth rate of labor productivity because of the imitation process and importing capital goods from abroad, until we reach the peak around 1.5, where it starts decreasing, where economies are at the technological frontier, and then every technology has to be, every new technology has to be created, I'm sorry, and technological progress is a result of new inventions and not imitation. Capital accumulation and balanced growth, we can see that the GY is the growth rate of output, GU is the growth rate of level capacity utilization, and GV is the growth rate of potential output. Turning to the macroeconomic equilibrium of investments and savings, we now assume that we are working on a closed economy for simplicity. And we have a fundamental characteristic of Keynesian growth models is the assumption that planned investment spending is autonomous in relation to planned savings, because we are working in an economy which is the banking sector is sufficiently developed and can provide the necessary liquidity for investments to take place. This is the set of equations that determine the macroeconomic equilibrium between savings, profits, and investments. Well, the profit rate R is given by equation 28, and then after some transformations, we arrive at the aggregate savings function on equation 31. So based on equation 31, we have different closures depending on what type of models we are analyzing. For instance, we have the Ricardian saving function, which workers' propensity to save is equal to 0 and all profits are distributed. The Herodian saving function, in which workers and capitalists' propensity to save are equal and all profits are distributed. The Pazinatian saving function, where workers have non-zero propensity to save, but lower than capitalists' propensity to save, and all profits are as well as distributed. And the Kaldorian saving function, which firms retain a share of total profits, but all households and households which are capitalists and workers has the same propensity to save and retain profits. Coefficient is higher than households' propensity to save. So this is the set of equations for the balanced growth and Kaldorian closure. I will skip this because for time. And the balanced growth in the Kaldorian closure, an important distinction with respect to the Herodian models is that saving function as a fraction of the capital stock is no longer constant, and it varies with the functional distribution of income between wages and profits. And the mechanism which establishes the warranted rate of growth that can adjust to the natural rate of growth. In equation 39, we can observe that given the normal degree of utilization of the productive capacity, potential capital output ratio, and propensity to save of households, and the warranted growth rate is a function of the profit share to income. And income distribution as a function of the technological gap. In equation 40, we see that the share of profits in income is the adjusting mechanism, which the warranted growth rate adjusts to the value of the natural growth rate. In the next figure, we will provide another numerical example, observing the relation between the technological gap and the income distribution. As we can see, as we reduce as well the profit, as we reduce the technological gap, the profit share increases until it reaches the peak point at around 1.5. And it starts decreasing again. It's the same as the labor productivity type of graph. So profit-led growth. In these models, regardless of the specification of the saving function, the accumulation is clearly profit-led. An exogenous increase in the natural rate of growth, for example, an increase in the rate of labor productivity, will require an increase in the rate of investments and savings. And for savings to adjust is required for the new balanced growth rate. The share of profits and income should increase as well in order to redistribute income from the lower propensity to save units, which are households and workers, to higher propensity to save units, for instance, capitalists and firms. In this way, the aggregate savings will adjust to the level of investment that is required to sustain the higher growth rate in the new trajectory of balanced growth. Some few assessments of this model, this type of model, is that the long-run rate of growth is determined by the natural rate of growth, which consists of the sum of the labor force, growth of the labor force, and the growth rate of labor productivity. And labor productivity, on the other hand, is the function of the technological gap, and which is, for instance, in relation to the distance between the technological gap of a country and the technological frontier. For levels of technology gap below a certain threshold, which is determined by the capacity to absorb new technologies that a country has, the rate of growth of labor productivity is a decreasing function of technology gap, as we've seen in the first numerical example. Countries that are relatively more distant from the technology frontier can present higher rates of growth of productivity, which is compatible to the catching up literature. Moving to demand-led growth models with unlimited supply of labor. In comparison, these models relax the assumption relax the assumption of labor supply to reflect that economies that are yet to finalize the industrialization process. A substantial part of the labor force, as Lewis in 1954 argued, are present in the subsistence sector, where labor productivity is considerably lower than industrial or modern sectors of the economy. So in these economies with unlimited labor supply, the fundamental restriction to long-term growth originates from the demand side of the economy. In open economies, components of the autonomous demand are two: exports and government spending. Two types of productive specialization are present in these types of models. The first are the primary exporting, primary producing goods economies and industrialized economies, which the first has lower income elasticity of demand for exports, resulting in non-dynamic exporting patterns. Two factors are important. First is the share of GDP, the share of industry to output, and the technological content of exports, which fundamentally depends on the technology gap. Well, the endogeneity of the long-term availability of factors of production produced in this economy with unlimited labor supply can never be considered independent of demand. So essentially, the problem lies not on the allocation of a given resources among alternative uses, but in the determination of the pace of expansion of the resources that are created in the economy. A fundamental condition for the extension of the capital stock are investment decisions, which are based on the opportunity cost and long-term expectation of demand. Obstacles for the expansion of the productive capacity are mainly financial, more specifically, the on the opportunity cost of capital. Regarding the availability of labor force, it can never be seen as an obstacle for economic growth, because working hours can increase, participation rate as well, and also there's the process of immigration. The pace of innovation in the economy can be considered a restriction to long-term growth. Well, technology progress is not exogenous to the economic system, so the pace of new innovation depends on the pace of capital accumulation, and partially as well on the process such as dynamic economies of scale and learning by doing. So, well, in the long run, the only limiting factors to economic growth in these types of model is aggregate demand. If there's a sufficiently high rate of return, allowing entrepreneurs to achieve the desired rate of return of capital, and an alternative profit rate greater than an effective profit rate greater than the cost of capital. So these models of export-led growth, for instance, the Dixon-Tyrrell model, consist of the following structure. Well, doing some transformations here, we arrive at the steady state growth and catching up. For the catching up to happen, the left part of the equation has to be greater than 1. In this way, the following condition is fulfilled. In expression 67 shows that the necessary and sufficient condition for catching up to occur to happen is the sum of price elasticity of exports and income elasticity of exports, multiplied by the difference between the Calder-Verdun coefficients of domestic and the rest of the world economies, and be higher than the export multiplier. So in the equation 67, the degree of productive specialization and intensity will be determined by the condition, if this condition is fulfilled or not. As a result, the primary exporting economy should present lower values for income elasticity of exports, and therefore the Calder-Verdun coefficients is going to be lower than industrialized economies. Therefore, these economies have a higher propensity to show slower economic growth and be lagging behind economic development. On the other hand, industrialized economies that have exports goods with higher technological intensity will present higher than average economic growth. Well, our conclusions from analyzing all these types of post-Keynesian inspired models, or Keynesian inspired growth models, is that underdevelopment can be analyzed from a Keynesian perspective. In the models presented, the balanced growth rate of the balanced growth rate trajectory is determined by the natural rate of growth, which depends on the sum of the growth rate of labor productivity and of labor force. The technological progress is embodied to capital equipment, and the growth rate of labor productivity depends on capital accumulation. And the extension to which progress can be incorporated in the machines depend on the technological gaps expressed in the asymmetries existing in technologies. Those differences in the growth rate of labor productivity in the balanced growth trajectory are compatible with technological gap generating growth divergency between countries. In models with unlimited labor supply, for instance, the growth is determined by the rate of expansion of aggregate demand and the autonomous component of aggregate demand, which is export. The investment rate adjusts to the pace of growth of exports, and therefore the equilibrium in goods markets is obtained by changes in the ratio of autonomous demand and capital stock. And the mechanism that allow the compatibility of the role of demand and the engine of growth in the long run in the economy is operating with the normal utilization rate, and distribution of income is determined at the microeconomic level in the price setting of firms via the markup. So finally, in the models analyzed in this work, uneven development is a result of the existing asymmetries between countries regarding its productive structure, specifically the differences of industry to output ratio. And I conclude here my presentation. Thank you.